Welcome at Change Talks, the podcast where we talk about change in business and personal life. And today, my guest is Ashenden, the coach and speaker specializing in burnout prevention and high performance mindset. Hannah has more than 15 years of experience and she's been helping both individuals and corporate teams. So, Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I think that we are having quite interesting discussion ahead of us because the burnout seems to be quite hot topic these days.
Mhm.
So let's dive into that and let's talk about the change.
Change Talks, your passport to exciting changes in your business, career, and life. Change Talks, your podcast when it's time to do things differently.
So how actually one becomes the burnout coach? What's your trajectory? How, one day you just woke up and decided, okay, I will do the burnout coaching. What's the story behind?
Well, as always, there's a much longer story behind it, but you're not far off, actually. There was a day where I went, oh my goodness, it was burnout. It was burnout all along, but I'll get to that bit. So originally, I'm a professional musician. I play the cello, mainly in theatres in the West End of London. And I still do that because that's quite a big part of who I am and my life and is very relevant to the work that I do in my coaching still as well. So I studied in the sort of traditional music conservatoire in London and in Switzerland and came back and started working. And I very quickly realized that something wasn't quite right. There were a couple of things that weren't right. One was that I had major performance anxiety. So I would be getting work, but in that work, I would be sitting there with imposter syndrome, doubting what was going to come out of my instrument, out of my body, wondering if this is for me. And the other element of that was a kind of a curiosity. I was seeing people around me doing this amazing work way, way, way into their 60s. Some people are even still doing it in their 70s. And I just started looking at it and thinking, I was already noticing, I was doing shows, so I was working in the evening, and that was quite a stressful pattern for me. Again, I didn't know why at the time, but now I understand it. And so I started questioning whether this is something that I wanted to be doing for the rest of my life. And I was probably 23, 24. So it was quite early on. I was sort of enjoying it, but also wondering if this was for me, and feeling quite stressed about it at the same time. And it was one of those serendipitous moments. My life tends to sort of work in this way where something random, seemingly random, will come in and it will be a life-changing event. I was reading a magazine in the pit of a theatre in the middle of a show, and I saw an advert for life coaching at the end of it. I was so bored, I'd read the whole magazine. So I was onto the adverts, which I never normally would be interested in. And I remembered when I was at school, the only other thing that I seemed to be good at, I was never sort of particularly, I was academic, I could get by, but I didn't feel like I was academic. My thing was music, languages, and then speaking to people. Everyone would always come to me and share their problems with me, and I seemed to be able to make them feel better without really knowing how. And I went home and I Googled life coaching on my very old computer. It took a very long time. And I really, really loved what I saw. I'd always been interested in the idea of being a counselor, but at that time, I didn't feel like I wanted to go back and retrain because I'd literally just started working professionally, having studied for 6 years already. So, what I loved about it was that it was so solution focused. It was sort of, this is where we are now. Yes, absolutely, we're going to look at your past and we're going to see where some of these issues are coming from. But this is where you are, and this is what you want to achieve and where you want to get to. And we've got steps to help you manage that. And the high performance mindset came from that because I kind of jumped on it. I went, actually, I think this is something that I want to do. And I took a course in the background of all of my playing work. And being coached myself enabled me to understand my mindset, what thoughts and emotions were happening as I was getting into that state of anxiety around my playing, and how to actually find different perspectives so that I could shift that and find a different way of being. And sometimes they're so, so simple. I remember the first one that I actually shared with a friend at the time, and he said, oh my God, it's changed my life, was what is the worst thing that's going to happen? What does your brain actually think is going to happen if you play one wrong note? Or if this one isn't quite exactly how you want it to come out? And as I started questioning that, I was like, oh, well, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to get fired if it's just one note. And that started me on this journey of really understanding how powerful our minds are when it comes to the results that we can achieve, but also our relationship with our body, with our nervous system, actually ultimately maybe being able to find happiness in quite an easy, straightforward way. And I just went down this rabbit hole of personal development, and very, again, accidentally ended up coaching for a company who helps neurodivergent adults in the workplace, which then a few years down the line, I realized that I have ADD, and I had absolutely no idea, but it explained so much for me, including a lot of the burnout cycle stuff. And through that work, I got so much coaching experience. I started to understand more about neurodiversity. I started to train and speak on neurodiversity, and it just has given me the most incredible wealth of connections and experiences and growth myself. And then fast forward quite a few years and quite a few not so healthy relationships. We got to COVID, and COVID, I started really taking the coaching seriously because, of course, there were no shows and no music going on. I say seriously in the sense of actually marketing myself rather than working for other people and training for other people. And I launched my first group coaching course, and it did really, really well. I called it Unstoppable because it was all about actually tapping into your innate power and being unstoppable in creating the kind of life that you want to lead. And then I got COVID. I think we moved house. My son was starting secondary school. So we moved to a new location in London. There was quite a lot of pressure because it was a bigger house and our expenses had gone up. And I just launched this coaching course, and I kind of quit quite a few things going, I've made it. This is it. This is the life I've always wanted to live. Hooray. And then I got COVID, and then I just took such a long time to recover. I don't think it was long COVID. I think what it was actually was that my body said, you've been burning out the whole of your life, and now you've stopped. We're going to show you quite how much recovery you need. And it made me question everything, how I'd been marketing myself, how much anxiety I'd actually had around my business and my success, and linking all of that to my self-worth. And it took me a lot of time. I actually sort of scaled everything back and went back to playing and made life quite simple so that I could reassess and understand. And in that process, I started working with a business coach. And this is where we started having the back and forth. And I said, well, I just want to help people with this thing like that I've experienced, this exhaustion and the imposter syndrome and the self-worth aspect of things. But I want to help people with it in corporate, because for the last 10, 15 years, most of my clients with the neurodivergence work have been in corporate, and they've been experiencing the same things. And there was literally one day where the word burnout came up, and I sort of looked at it all. I stepped back and I looked at it and I went, this is what it's been. This is what it's been my whole life. The waking up and feeling anxious, the exhausting yourself with, shall I do it this way? Shall I do it this way? What will the response be? Will it work? The constant kind of monkey mind and doubt, and the taxing of my nervous system in the process. And my body at some point just going, no, sorry, you have to stop now. We're going to show you. And it all just came together beautifully. And it was so lovely because I didn't have a word to really explain. I knew I wanted to help people heal their trauma, heal their past, tap into who they really are, find their happiness. But so much of that still sounded to me, and maybe this was just my own imposter syndrome, but it sounded very cliched self-help world. I didn't have the sort of the specific vocabulary to go, no, this is what I'm going to help you do. And actually, coming full circle back to the very beginning, this is where you are, and this is where I'm going to help you get to. And I love it. It's just the most amazing journey. Everybody's burnout looks different. Everybody's history is different. But the journey is similar in that it's unpacking what's been going on under the surface, bringing it into the light and treating it with compassion and having massive, massive self-awareness so that we can then do things differently to get to where we want to be. But it's a journey. And as we were talking slightly earlier, it means doing things differently, and not everybody wants to do that. And certainly corporate doesn't necessarily want to do that yet. We're getting there. So that's really how it all kind of came about. And here I am teaching people about burnout, talking about burnout, still very much helping. I do find that a lot of my clients are neurodivergent in some way, shape, or form because they do tend to be highly sensitive people who are very affected by their surroundings and so have to be even more on it with preventing and recognizing burnout.
That's quite a journey, really. And so the first defining moment when you, for the first time, were looking into this, like, life coaching, was that because you were looking, like, for help, or was it with the idea that you will take it as some kind of side hustle and you wanted to explore it as a new line of business?
It was
Not
that.
being quite happy with playing, like, with the high pressure as a musician. So which
It
the
was definitely
case?
one. It was wanting to have a different option for making money that I was as passionate about as I was about music. And also, I was thinking at some point, I think I want to have children, and do I want to be out at night carrying my cello around London? I was kind of questioning, I think I was quite quickly questioning what my life was going to look like, even though I'd only just really felt like I'd stepped into it in professional terms. So at the beginning, it was definitely, thinking strategically around how do I want to be able to live the rest of my life in a way that I want to live it, in the way that I'm in control. But then, of course, as with everything in the process, I realized it was for me having help as well.
Yeah, that's quite interesting that you one day realized that you should be your own patient, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, the journey is constant and I'm always looking for help myself because it's how I support other people better as well. I think any good coach or any good therapist will always be on that journey themselves because it doesn't end. So, and I love that. I love uncovering new things.
But it's also good that you had this kind of attitude as an entrepreneur, because you mentioned that you were building and developing your business in, like, coaching and so on. It went very well, but actually you realized that you too are kind of suffering these burnout symptoms and so on. Yeah. So this realization and paying attention to your own well-being, to your own state of mind is super important, right? And I think many entrepreneurs forget that, and that's why they are then your clients one day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, and I think that also having this personal experience with the burnout, that should make you a better coach, because you understand from the very personal perspective how it feels. And I think it's always good to, when you have a coach that actually knows what he or she talks about, because he or she's been there. And if it's burnout, if it's, I don't know, business growth, if it's social media, whatever it is, it's always good to have a person who is in the know.
Definitely. I think a really good coach can coach anyone. I think the skills of empathy and listening and having tools and being adaptable is means that you can if you want to. But I think, like you say, there is nothing like being aligned in personal experience. And also, just to echo what you've said, I think that the reason that that coach has the right tools for you or the right approach for you is because they understand it so deeply and because they've had to walk that path themselves. And so, as a client, that they're not coming from a place of, oh, just try this, this works for everybody. It's like, no, no, no. I've tried all of these things myself and I can offer them to you because I've been through them. And also I share a lot with my clients. I'm quite an oversharer anyway. So, and the feedback I get is actually it's really helpful for me to know that you've been through this, that you're still vulnerable to this if you don't practice what you preach, and that we're all human and I'm not alone. And I think that is also really important. It's very easy sometimes, I think, to see our coaches and our therapists and the people that we go to for help as, a bit of a guru or somebody on a pedestal. And we're not, we're all human and we're all having to walk our talk. And if we don't, then that line is always there. And I think it is helpful for clients to know that.
Yeah, I think it also gives you kind of like humble view that you are not okay. I'm superhuman. You know that you are human too, and you can take these experiences to help others. Now, so you mentioned that burnout is quite, let's say, relatively fresh topic for you. So for how long you've been specializing in this, like burnout? You extended your scope and added burnout into your repertoire.
So, using the word burnout about 3 years. But what I realized was that I had been coaching people for burnout since I started coaching. It was just realizing that that's actually what it was. And so I could put it into terms that people understood better so that they could recognize it in themselves. Because actually, the things that I was helping people deal with were those things of recognizing what they needed, understanding why their past and the way that they were doing things and their thoughts and their emotions had led to this feeling of sort of breakdown or crisis or where am I or how do I do this? But understanding that that was actually the terminology for what I'd been doing all along, maybe I'd say the last 2 to 3 years.
hmm But altogether, you have 15 years of experience in coaching. So, would you say that the burnout is on the uprise? Is it more frequent than before? Is it the same? What's your observation?
So yes, definitely. I mean, it could be one of those things that, the more you notice it, the more you notice it kind of thing. I think it's a combination. I think it's on the uprise because first of all, we're talking about it more and we're acknowledging it. So people are feeling like they have permission to go, I think I feel like this too, actually. Oh my God, I'm so glad you've just put words to what I'm feeling. But I think also on the other hand, the pace of life is so fast. We're expecting ourselves to do all of the things. Multitasking is at a high, stimulation is at a high. And I think we're realizing that there's a ceiling to actually how much we can cope with this before we kind of burst. And so therefore we are having to find different ways of being in the world, of navigating all of the stimulus and the stimulation around us, especially with, everything, social media, computers, AI, all of the demands, rising costs of life. We're sort of, I think we've pushed it as far as we can go in the way that we've been doing it. So now we really need to look at well-being and how we make life sustainable, how we make our well-being sustainable. So I think it's a combination of people feeling validated and understood and being able to talk about it. But also I do actually think it's on the uprise because I think the pace at which we're living is not sustainable.
Okay, so we can actually blame the environment and the society, the jobs, and so on. What would you say is actually like the main root cause? Can we point a finger and say, okay, this is like the main problem? Because when you will start like to think, okay, how then to deal with the burnout, how to treat it, perhaps to understand what is the biggest root cause is always good, right? So can we point a finger to something specific?
I think, can I point it to one thing? I'm struggling to boil it down to one thing.
One or two.
So I think that the external is that again with the pace of life and the expectations on us, I think there's no limit to what we expect ourselves to do, or maybe what our employer expects us to do. I think that people are being asked to be and do so much more. And because of the environment that we see around us and our access to absolutely everything on the internet, I think also there's that danger of always wanting the next thing or thinking that, I'll be happy when I get the promotion or I make this much money or I have 10 side hustles or I'm the perfect entrepreneur. So I think it's partly there being so much too available to us in terms of what we think that we want and maybe what our employers want of us, that we are pushing ourselves so much more. And on the emotional side of things, because for me, it's always a balance between the inner and outer game. On the inner game, I think that so many people have attached their self-worth to their identity, and their identity is attached to what they do. So I think it's realizing that actually you've been pushing yourself for all of the wrong reasons, because you think that when you're doing this thing, or you are this kind of person, or you can say, I've got this much money or this many followers, that it will mean something about you and your self-worth. And I think that those two things have been driving us into this state of anxiety and overstimulated nervous systems and dysregulation. So for me, that's the external and the internal that we can, I think, point our fingers at.
Mm-hmm. So basically, the external is the idea that I need to chase more, get new things, cars, houses, I don't know, exotic vacations, and that we believe that once we achieved these goals, so that we will feel happy, more validated, and so on. And internally is that we want to prove to the world that we are worth it, that we are successful, and so on. Which I think maybe even that goes to this external element, which what I see from a lot of entrepreneurs is that they are pushing themselves, believing that they must be successful because they see other successful entrepreneurs or like entrepreneurs on social media and so on, yeah? Or they read Forbes magazine and there is a great article how this guy made 5 millions in 1 year. And if they are not that successful, they feel frustrated, so they work very hard, and that hard work actually then leads them to burnout.
Exactly.
So it's the
And
having unhealthy ideas of how the success actually looks like or should look like. Is it a fair statement or?
no, I really do. And when you're saying that, I just want to add as well that I think most people, this goes back to the being honest about your own journey, right? Most people who are presenting themselves as highly successful, and they may well be, they absolutely, their success, say the word, success is legitimate, but they've not shown the journey, and they've not shown their struggles or the bits that they find challenging. And that's where I think social media can be so dangerous, that from the outside, you look like everything's perfect. But to get to that level of success, you have had to go through your whole journey of mental, emotional, physical challenges to get to that point. And then you come out the top and you go, ta-da, this is how I did it. But you don't include those bits. And so from the outside, like you say, as a entrepreneur sort of trying to do that journey yourself, you're putting yourself under so much pressure without understanding that it's okay for it to not be instantly successful, or it's okay for it to have huge challenges that transform you. Because for me, actually, that's what, having your own business and entrepreneurship is actually about. It's about being willing to go through those challenges and look at yourself and look at your shadows and the things that you're scared of. But we don't see that journey. So exactly what you just said, we put ourselves under massive pressure and think that we should be there now, and then wonder why we're not.
Yeah. Actually, no, now we mentioned entrepreneurs, but from your experience, from your observations, who is more susceptible to burnout, entrepreneurs or employees? Is there any difference?
That's a really good question. I think actually that depends on the type of person, and why they're burning out. So I see a lot of employees burning out because they are scared to put boundaries in place and say no. They're scared to ask for different ways of doing things. They feel like they have to fit into the machine and do it in the same way that everybody else is doing it. Or they are putting themselves under pressure. They're actually in the wrong job for them. It could be that they still stay as an employee or stay in corporate, but they are in the wrong role. It doesn't allow them to bring out their strengths and their skills and live to their strengths. So they're kind of constantly fighting against themselves because they're feeling like they need to do things in the same way as everybody else, and that doesn't come naturally to them. So that's where I see a lot of sort of burnout happening in the corporate, in the employee world. And then on the entrepreneurship side, I think, again, you've probably got a slightly different type of person who is maybe more used to, I'd say, sort of not such a set routine, but they have their own challenges there in terms of managing themselves or regulating themselves or putting themselves under the pressure that we've just talked about. So in a way, I don't know if there's one is more susceptible to the other. I think they've both got their own trigger points. And we find, but then you find some people in corporate who actually would be better off as entrepreneurs, and vice versa. Some people actually would be better off with the structure. So I think it's partly sort of, are you in the right environment? And what is that environment triggering for you that leads you to burnout?
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific traits of the environments that create burnout more easily than the others? Um, industry sectors or company cultures that trigger that. What to look for?
I've had a lot of clients who are trainee accountants and lawyers. And that kind of environment seems to lend itself very well to there's no limit to the amount of hours that we expect you to work. Or there's just huge volumes of information that need to be learned that does just take extra time. And I still see a lot of that hustle mentality of I'm just going to keep going until I've got it, and also the sort of the status symbol of being in the office till 1, 2 a.m. People are still doing this. And so I think there are industries where that kind of more obvious, I'm just going to push burnout is still happening. I think that I'm just trying to think of different industries that I know that my clients are in. I think, to be honest, it's probably less evolved, more traditional companies, maybe bigger companies that have always done things in the same way. And it's still not being questioned. So there are still, for example, I was having a chat with somebody the other day where there are just meetings for the sake of meetings. Meeting upon meeting upon meeting where nothing gets done, nothing gets decided, and everybody has to turn up. And no one has space for 25 meetings a week. But they're still happening in the same way because no one's kind of really questioning who's responsible for this. How do we need to do this? How could we get the best result out of this meeting? What's our agenda? Who really needs to be here? Or actually, on the flip side, I've got lots of examples. I've got clients who are bored, who are genuinely not being utilized in the way that their skill sets could bring incredible results. And they're sitting there going, but I'm being paid and someone's watching to see if I'm on Teams. And I feel like I should be doing something and I feel guilty and I've asked for work, but no one is giving me work. And so theirs is this sort of anxiety of I'm going to get in trouble, but I don't really know what I'm doing wrong. And so it's sort of like a stagnant boredom that actually there's another part of burnout that I think is really, really important to recognize. And I was talking to somebody about this just yesterday. And that is, it's not just about doing too much or pushing ourselves too hard. It's about not doing enough of the stuff that lights us up. And so when we're in a job where we're not actually allowed to run with something because we're being constrained by, the limitations of you can only do work when I give it to you, then we're actually getting depressed without realizing it. And that internalized can turn into burnout because you've got no stimulation that gives you the dopamine and the endorphins and the serotonin and the purpose and the thing to aim for. So there's another whole layer of it there. So I think there are so many different pockets of industries where there is potential for burnout for different reasons. And again, it's about sort of understanding it and uncovering it and then seeing what we can do differently.
So I seem to get some pattern here from your answers, which is that people who are more likely to suffer from burnout are actually ambitious people, right? Because they may have either healthy ambitions, but too or maybe too many ambitions.
Yeah.
Or if they are put into an environment that is not allowing them to achieve these ambitions, like you mentioned traditional corporations, and you have the person who wants to do something, change something, and then it's hitting all the walls, all the barriers around, all the glass ceilings. That is causing a lot of frustration. And if you are for a long time in this environment, then the symptoms of the burnout can develop quite easily, right? And even the people you said who would like to work and are not utilized, I think it's the same kind of pattern, right? Because they are ambitious, they would like to do something, do more, They are just not allowed to do that. And that clash is then the root cause of the problem.
Yes, I love that you spotted that because I didn't spot it. It's so true because actually I talk a lot about burnout being this feeling of driving with the parking brake on. So your engine's going and you're trying to get somewhere and go somewhere, but there's a brake that's actually stressing the system and ultimately is going to, make your car blow up. So it is exactly that, and for different reasons for different people, but that ultimately I think is that underlying feeling of there's energy and impetus that needs to go somewhere, but there's the constraint. And the constraint can also be fear of failure or fear of rejection or being, abandonment, being fired. And I also want to speak to, so I agree with you completely. I think actually that it happens to a lot of high achievers and also people who put a lot of pressure on themselves to be high achievers, but don't necessarily feel like it. And the reason I want to speak to that is partly because that's where I came from. And I think also there's a lot of people who will not identify as very driven, motivated high achievers, but they are without realizing it. So if you've had a lot of pressure put on you as a child, or you've just sensed that, or you've always had lots of big ideas and haven't had known how to implement them, that can just lead to this sense of great expectation that you're never meeting. And for me, that actually internalized into a kind of a procrastination and a lethargy. So I was seeing myself as a low achiever. I was seeing myself as somebody who could be very lazy, even though I didn't realize that laziness, that lethargy was actually my body shutting down and saying, hello, I'm burnt out. But the expectation doesn't go anywhere. So it's up here and you're constantly trying to get to it, thinking, I'm not good enough. I should be doing more. But you also may not be feeling like you're doing anywhere near enough. So I think, yes, absolutely motivated, driven, high achiever, but those things aren't always recognized in the person, and they might be seeing themselves as somebody who's not good enough whilst still maintaining these very high expectations. And that can do exactly the same thing.
What I like is that you actually describe the other side of the coin that I'm dealing with, because in the corporate environment, I'm helping the managers actually to equip them with the hard skill set, with the hard tools, how to push the change through the organization, whether it's like big project transformation or whatever. And my approach is actually quite systematic, based on hard skills, hard tools, how to make that happen. Now, what you do and how you help the people is actually with the other side of the coin, which is the emotional element. Yeah? Which for me is just some sort of variable, but I know and I understand that it's much more than that. And if that person already moves very close to the burnout, then it becomes a problem of itself, right?
Yeah.
Now, one more question I have to this, who is more susceptible, which is, would you say it's more problem of men or women? Is there any difference?
That's a really difficult one to answer because, again, I think it shows up differently. I would, I don't know. You know why? Because I was going to say, I think that maybe men mask it longer because maybe societal expectations of being vulnerable or admitting that you need help. But then I'm going to contradict myself because actually women are excellent also at masking beyond beyond a level that you think we are. So I don't know. I mean, I have clients who are both men and women and experiencing very similar things. I think probably maybe women might be faster to recognize it, but also I'm gonna also offer that on the emotional side of things, women, and this is a big generalization here, so forgive me, I'm just going to say it anyway. I think that women hold more emotional space for different things. So, if you're a mother, or if you're a caregiver, or if you're there's just something there that we do tend to, there's the old joke about women being better multitaskers. I don't actually think multitasking is a thing, but there is that idea that we are We're taking on the emotional cognitive load for perhaps more just because we're wired that way. We're wired to be hyper aware of the surroundings in a different way than men are. So I think particularly on the emotional side of things, I would say women, but that's not to take away from men's experience at all. I think they'll burn out in different ways, but also they might be more susceptible to a bigger burnout in the long term because they might be trying to either mask it or thinking that they shouldn't have help or they shouldn't ask for help, or the expectation is that men don't still. So I think there's still some cultural things around there that maybe stop us recognizing it. But I don't really want to say one or the other because I think, again, it's very different for everybody.
I was curious what you are going to say, what's going to be your observation, really, because as I said at the very beginning, I've seen a lot of people suffering burnout in my social circle, in a social bubble, and my observation is that actually it's a mixture of both men and women, and men seem to be, as you said, like to hide it for longer. So then when it comes, the hit is much harder because I think men are not just used to talk about emotions and feelings and share it with the others, right? While women do that more naturally. So I think that allows them to seek help or get some sort of help sooner than men. So, but in terms of the susceptibility, I agree with you that it really depends on the environment and on how ambitious that person is, and what's the difference between the perception, the reality, and the ideal state.
Yeah, perfectly put.
Yeah. So we touched a little bit, like on the symptoms and on how burnout comes, because it's a quite long process, right? It's not that like one day it just boom comes. It's not like a virus that you catch one day and the other day you are just having flu or whatever. So what are the typical symptoms that we can observe, and either on ourselves or my question would be like twofold: how to recognize that I may be approaching or suffering burnout, and the second side of that is how to find out that my colleagues, for example, or my partner is actually approaching the burnout, so that I can somehow help. So how to find out?
Good question. So I think if we to look at ourselves first of all, I think there's the obvious go-to, which is energy levels, that it feels like actually nothing, no amount of self-care, sleep, time off is actually fixing that underlying feeling of it's not enough. I just can't recover. I just don't seem to be at my peak energy levels, no matter what I do. So I think that's one of the most obvious things. But again, as I was sort of alluding to the boredom aspect of things earlier, there's like a lack of enthusiasm for life. So nothing really kind of makes you laugh like it used to, or nothing really excites you like it used to. There's a sort of an apathy that we can have where you sort of wake up and you're like, I just can't even be bothered. Or for me, actually, when I was at my lowest, it was that I've always been very driven by deadlines. I need a certain amount of adrenaline and focus to go, yeah, okay, right, we're going to be in focus mode now. And at my rock bottom, that didn't even scare me. I was just like, fine.
So do you like start the not paying attention, do not care? That's the first one.
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And also our immune system. There's also more subtle things like even, neck pain, shoulder pain. There's a lot to do with burnout and the nervous system and the vagus nerve. And we might notice sort of physical symptoms that we wouldn't put down to burnout, but actually, again, it's your body going, I need some attention here. Hello. And immune system, maybe getting sick more often or never kind of fully recovering. So again, I think for me, the whole thing is holistic. So I'll always kind of touch upon the physical and the mental and emotional. And I think if you're in tune with yourself, you can start to notice these things. But a lot of them can be so subtle that they can go unnoticed for a long time. So you might be sort of like, oh yeah, I've had this thing for a while now. It's kind of really annoying, or I seem to get headaches more often and it's kind of there, or I've got the latest cold again, but you're not really necessarily putting it down to something chronic that's still kind of ramping up in the background. And the emotional things as well. You might just sort of think, well, I just need some more time to watch Netflix. I need another day off, or maybe again, and switching over into noticing things into other people, you might not feel like socializing as much. You feel like you need to hibernate, even though it's never quite enough. It feels like too much to be going out and doing things because they're not bringing you fun. They're exhausting you even further. So then looking into colleagues or friends or partners, it's kind of tuning into those subtle changes, maybe noticing the things that they used to do before that they don't do anymore. Maybe they're not as present with you, or maybe they're more irritable, more easily triggered, or they are taking more time off. They're not showing up for social things. Or from a work point of view, maybe their performance is waning and it's not what they're used to doing, but it's like you don't have that capacity to go above and beyond anymore. Or maybe you don't even have the capacity to kind of meet the minimum anymore. And it's those little indications of, okay, this is not how it used to be. And this person is not kind of quite who I used to know them to be. And how can I, and it's kind of catching it and asking them, how can I support you? What's going on? Is there anything that's changed here? And that they might not even recognize it in themselves. So it does, like you say, when we're talking about sort of being willing to share, I think it also does take being in touch with your people, whether it's your friends or your colleagues or your employees, and knowing maybe what they're struggling with in the background. Also, there's, you might see something from a work point of view and know nothing about their home life and their emotional life. And actually, maybe they are giving a lot of their empathy and their resources to a situation that you're not seeing on the surface. And it's affecting things, but they're still masking it well enough to not be blatantly obvious. So there are some things that we can see, and there are some things that we actually need to have that kind of conversation and understand what might be going on for somebody on a more subtle or a more personal level.
Mm. So you nicely described actually the two dangers that are associated with the burnout symptoms. First is that they come very slowly. Yeah? So they sneak in and it's difficult to notice them. Yeah? I say it's like, it's like Apache. Yeah, he sneaks in, very silently. You don't see anything, you don't hear anything, but then, boom, it kills. So, but jokes aside, yeah. So it's difficult to recognize these symptoms because they are, progressing slow, step by step, and we get used to them. And the second is that we may actually associate these symptoms, if we notice them, with something completely different. Yeah, I may have like neck pain, and I think, okay, maybe it's because I have old mattress, yeah, and I should buy a new mattress, maybe. Or I don't know what, yeah, I'm more sick, but it's because, I had COVID, so my immune system is, weak because of that, for example. So we try to get the connections, yeah, we try to understand what's going on usually, but we may not attribute it to the right root cause. And that's the danger, with the burnout. So is there any scientific, sophisticated, or easy ways, that a questionnaire or something, that people can take to see, how they cope with, if they are susceptible to burnout, that, on the score 0 to 100, I'm 80, so or whatever. Is there any way how to confirm the suspicions that burnout may be knocking on the door?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've just described does it perfectly. I don't know if there's an official one, but I do know, if you Google it, there'll be lots of places where you can take a questionnaire and you can answer those questions. But I think what you've just described is actually the perfect solution, which is again where my passion lies when it comes to coaching people, and that's self-awareness. Right? If you know what your 10 out of 10 looks like in terms of fulfillment, peace of mind, well-being, energy levels, sleep, nutrition, you know what makes your system tick and work really well for you, and what it looks like when you're at your best, then you know where the, like sometimes I talk about it with my clients in a sort of red, amber, green. You know what that system is for you. So you know what amber looks like. You're like, oh, okay, hold on. I'm reaching the level here where I know I need to cut out coffee and make sure I sleep a little bit more. Or I know the emotional situations that are triggering to me, or I know how much pressure I can put myself under before I get to amber. And then you know what your red is, and you know all of the little bits in between. So there are lots of questionnaires out there that people can do. And ultimately, the aim of that is to know yourself well enough to know where those levels are, because there are also different levels of burnout, right? So, like you say, if it's sneaking up on you, you might be amber about to tick over into red, but you don't know. But if you do know, then you can catch it and you can understand it, and you can go, okay, this is what this looks like for me. How do I bring myself back into balance with myself? So yeah, self-awareness. I think you've put it perfectly. That's kind of what those things are for, and what we need in order to prevent burnout and recognize it before it gets too serious.
But there is one thing I think important for the self-awareness, which is to actually know that such a thing as a burnout exists, right? Because if you don't know anything about burnout, you haven't heard about it, and you have these symptoms, you may take a different assessment or different steps, to treat that. So instead of saying, okay, I need to take more sleep because my body is telling me that I'm running on the edge, you may take a completely different treatment, like okay, I need more coffee.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To overcome it, it's just some kind of tiredness. Maybe it's the autumn weather. Yeah, it's rainy outside, so that's what makes me feel blue and low on energy. So just drink more coffee. That will fix it. But if you know that there is such a thing as a burnout, you may actually rightly attribute it to that, and take steps and treatments that will really help you out, because more coffee is not helping anything.
Right, exactly. And also, I think you treat yourself differently and your mindset is different as well. So rather than thinking, my God, I'm just so inadequate because these things seem to tire me out, or actually going back to sort of changing our ways of working, um, there might be ways of working that would work better for you than the way that you are at the moment, especially with entrepreneurs. This is maybe slightly trickier to do if you're in a 9 to 5. But as a personal example, for me, I'm either very on or I'm very off. So I can do a lot of work, I can see a lot of people, I can do a lot of trainings, and I can be very focused for a certain amount of time. And then I have to have time where I am just by myself. There's
Uh-huh.
no one. And I give myself complete permission to desaturate, regulate myself, be peaceful, do all the things that make me happy. But in the past, I would have seen that as failure. I would have seen that as, well, everybody else can go out and have a nice time this weekend. Why aren't you doing that? Or why aren't you able to be more consistent with X, Y, Z? So again, that self-awareness piece of, maybe I should have more coffee. Oh no, maybe I should have more sleep. Maybe I shouldn't be so lazy. Oh no, maybe I need to really put boundaries around my downtime. It's exactly that. You're right. It changes your perspective on why you're doing what you're doing and why you need to do the things that make you feel more regulated.
Yeah. So we started to talk a little bit about prevention, right? Because the best way how to deal with burnout is actually not to arrive to that station at all. So what people can do to prevent it, to not have any problems?
Mm. Oh, not to have any problems. Well, that's a big question.
It's a nice question, isn't it? Yeah.
So I think the self-awareness piece is key. I think if people can start to just look back over your past and look at where you have felt most happy, most fulfilled, most balanced. I want to say most energetic, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're full of beans and you're bouncing off the walls. It just means that you're not waking up feeling exhausted and depleted, or you don't have that underlying feeling of, this is going to be too much. I think knowing what your knowing what lights you up, knowing what makes you feel like you, because that's going to be different for everybody. It might be lots of rest for some people, for the introverts, and it might actually be being with your community and your people and your friends and your family. But knowing what that looks like for you, and then knowing what your biggest triggers are. So you can either think about, things that set you off on a daily basis, that, when when you're at your most tired, that's a good place to find your triggers, because that's where you have least patience. You react in the most, maybe the least well thought out way. That will give you your starting place of what are the things that set me off most easily. And also, then there's looking back at maybe bigger past events, things that have really impacted you negatively on a very high level. And that's going to give you a tapestry of what your best is and what your danger zones are. And then I think it's a case of, so for me, when I work with my clients, we always look at the pillars, the physical, mental, and emotional pillars. Then it's looking at, well, what brings me back into balance the fastest and what makes me feel closer to that best version of me. So physically, am I, how much water do I need? And again, it's different for everyone. I never subscribe to the everybody needs to drink this much or do this much exercise or get this many hours of sleep, because we're all so different. So for you, what does physical well-being require as a minimum base level? So I talk about my non-negotiables with my clients. What is the absolute minimum that you'd be happy with? Yes, we're going to aim for here, but we're going to make sure that this happens. So do you need to have a glass of water next to your computer, right? So what are your physical bare minimums? Then what are your mental ones? So how does your mind work? And when do you notice yourself spiraling into stress? And in order for that not to happen, or in order for you to be able to bring it back quite easily into balance, what are some of the mental tools that you need? So maybe it might be like I mentioned earlier, asking yourself, when you notice that anxiety, what's the worst that can happen? Or what am I really worried about here? How can I identify that? Maybe there's a journaling thing works for you as a tool. And then on the emotional side of things as well, again, looking at maybe what are the feelings that come up when I am nearing my amber level? What are the triggers that make me feel like I should be pushing myself further? Or that actually I can't say no to this person and I can't put a boundary in place. So again, self-awareness and knowing what that looks like, but then having actual physical tools that we can put in place for ourselves. So I know if I'm not careful, I cannot leave the house when I'm coaching people all day. I have to make sure, I have to be really strict with myself, especially when it's horrible and grey and raining, and make myself get outside. Because to me, that's physical, mental, and emotional. Physically, I'm moving my body, I'm getting my heart rate going, I'm getting proper oxygen in. But mentally and emotionally, it makes my whole world feel different. I get a completely different perspective. I leave the confines of this space and I go, oh, there's a bigger world out there than my little room and my head. And oh, I love nature. Nature makes me feel so good. And oh, don't I live in an amazing... And it just takes me out of the inner world that has the potential to put me into a spin and a burnout, and gives me that perspective. So for me, that's one of my non-negotiables. It can be simple as getting out of the house every day, once a day, if not more. So again, it will look different for everybody, but it's about knowing yourself and knowing what those things are. And then, maybe even having support to make sure that you do those things. Because when you're on the verge of burnout, being accountable to yourself is really, really difficult, really hard, because your resources are not as strong as they are when you're on top.
So to have some pre-prepared routines, perhaps. Yeah, that's what you say. So
Yes.
that you say, okay, I know that when I'm going to observe these kind of symptoms on me, that I'm irritable, tired, or whatever, I already know what I'm going to do to deal with that. Yeah. So I know that, okay, I will need to just take a walk somewhere in the nature just to clear my head or whatever, or that I will just maybe take a short break, to make a coffee or maybe something, different. I don't know. So to have it already in a shelf that okay, when this happens, then I do this.
Yes.
Not to think about it, have it as a automatic reaction. Because if you have it automated, then you can treat it quite effectively, right?
Exactly. When it's automated, you don't have to think about it. And when you're burnt out, you don't have capacity to think about it. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's putting the systems in place so that they're there for you exactly when you need it. It's like you press the red button and you go, okay, here we go, emergency. And the systems come in and they go, it's okay, cool, we just do this. We don't have to think about it. So exactly that, having things in place that you don't have to think about, that you have already identified as rebalances.
Mm. So now let's imagine that you were not paying enough attention to these symptoms and you didn't have this kind of routines. Basically, you are now like, in deep trouble. And so what that person should do and how difficult it is then to come back, let's say, to life from the depths of really serious burnouts.
Okay, so I'm going to say the thing no one wants to hear. It's not easy. It's really not easy, which is why I'm so passionate about the prevention side of things, because you can take time off sick, which is really important. So first of all, get help and take time off. You have to. There's just no two ways about it. And the time off is going to help to a certain degree. So I talk about it in terms of like having an energy overdraft. When you're in debt, you have to pay off a lot of debt before you even get to zero. And when we've reached that chronic stage, unfortunately, a few weeks off work is going to sort of bring you up here in terms of your overdraft, but it's not going to necessarily get you here. And it's certainly, sorry, I'm realizing that I'm on video, not using words for people who can't see me. It's not going to get you to zero necessarily. And zero even isn't a place where you want to be going back to work and going fully fledged into your life before. You need to make sure that you're in energetic credit. So I think recognizing that it's going to take time, and and I'm saying this from an idealistic point of view. There are situations where we have to keep working, right? You can't just, not everybody will have sick pay. Certainly as a self-employed person, I know that's true. No one paid me when I was completely and utterly burnt out, and it was scary. I burnt through my savings in order to have time off, and then I had to go back to work before I was ready. So in that case, take all the time that you can, ask for all the help that you can ask for. And that takes a lot for a lot of people as well. Sometimes it will mean asking friends and family to help us when we don't necessarily want to, or we're too proud to. And then it's a case of recognizing that it's baby steps. It is quite, when you've really hit rock bottom, it is a long road to recovery. So it's understanding that you're going to have up days and you're going to have down days, and you're going to need to be extra vigilant about everything that we've just talked about. So what the signs are for you, what your limits are, and how you replenish your energy. And I think this is where self-compassion comes in. You have to be very gentle with yourself, and you have to know that you will get there. Absolutely, it's possible you will get there, but it's going to be a longer journey if you got to rock bottom in the first place.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I can confirm that from cases of some of my friends or colleagues that unfortunately hit the rock bottom, and the recovery is then is that not easy, and it takes really time. And what is super important to understand is that you really need to get out. You really need to get out of the environment that's been causing your burnout. If it's your business, so you need to put it like on hold at least for some time. If it's your job, again, you will need to put it like on hold for some time. And I think maybe that's a problem or a fear that some people who are on like in the deep in the burnout, and they already may realize where they are, but they are so scared of taking this step, taking this time off, that they like continue until they really hit the very bottom. But the thing is that actually, if you take the break, it can turn out into something better. You can find a new business opportunities there or so on. Actually, I recommend you another episode of Change Talks. I think number 15 with Zuzana Fiantokova. She suffered burnout in her professional life. She took, I think, 9 months career break, And that helped her actually to find out that there is a new business opportunity for her. And she started new business as a solo entrepreneur. And she's now very happy doing, what she's doing. So actually, that reminds me to tell you, if you are interested in Change Talks, to subscribe, because then you will not miss any episode and you will stay in the loop with great guests that we have here. So, but back to Hannah. Yeah. So, very, very true. Yeah. So to take the treatment and be prepared to take some time off, but don't see it as something like bad, because at the end of the tunnel, completely new and much better opportunities can wait for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, I listened to that episode. It was brilliant. I loved it so much. So yeah, go and check that one out. I think that, and this is again one of the things that I tell my clients is you feel like you're at rock bottom right now. Sometimes also we feel like failures because we say, well, how come that person isn't burnt out? I was doing the same thing as them, right? And we're comparing ourselves and shaming ourselves. But actually, what's happening is this most amazing transformation process, which exactly like you say, you come out the other side of it and you've questioned everything about what you've done up until now in your life, or at least the way that you've done it. And you have the most amazing opportunity to choose a different path, whether it's a different job, a different mindset, a different way of living your life, of having your routine. It gives you the opportunity to do that. And I do think that there is, whilst it's not a pleasant experience, there is a big gift in hitting rock bottom often. And you actually come out with more self-awareness and more choice because you've had to consciously make the choice to change. And that in itself is an incredible strength and skill set that a lot of people won't have unless they've had that experience. So there is a lot of depth and a lot of, I think, blessing in that experience, even though it's painful. And you do come out a little bit like the phoenix rising from the flames, going, okay, fine, hello world, what do I want now? And that episode that you mentioned, I think, is the perfect example. And a very, similarly to me, okay, I stayed in the same kind of field, but it gave me clarity around what it was that I was actually doing, what it was that had been happening to me all along, and how I could then more specifically help other people. And I think also the other thing I wanted to add to that was that oftentimes our body really was calling us to make those choices in the first place. I mentioned earlier that sometimes it's people are in the wrong role or the wrong business. And like you said, we're so scared to make that change. Change is really scary, and reassessing our life is scary, and going on a different path to the one that we've always known is scary. We are creatures of habits. We're sort of big contradictions in ourselves. We're always chasing the next thing and we want the growth, but we're actually scared of the change that the growth will bring. So again, there's that feeling of driving with the parking brake on, right? We're contradicting ourselves a lot of the time anyway. And so a lot of people that I do see hit rock bottom and then make big life changes are the ones that go, do you know what? It wasn't really ever for me, or I never was really happy. I just couldn't see it. I was lying to myself because of the expectations that I put on myself, or the fear of leaving security and the life that I knew. And so I do think life does that for us naturally. Often it is, the body and the nervous system and life going, well, you weren't listening to me, so I had to show you really obviously. And then we make the changes. So again, if we could look at the preventative side of it, I really do think that helping people understand what's going on inside them mentally and emotionally, and how that's affecting their behaviors and their choices on the physical action side, gives us the chance to assess those things sooner and gives us the tools to deal with fear of change and change itself. And that then will ultimately lead to more people being more fulfilled in roles and lifestyles and places that work for them, and not reaching that place of burnout in the first place.
I think that's actually a great summary of the whole team and the recommendation in itself. How to lead a happier life, whether you are an employee or entrepreneur, and not hitting the rock bottom.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you so much, for sharing all these thoughts and insights and recommendations for the people. if there is a person listening, feeling that he or she may be on the edge of burnout and considering getting some help, how people can get in touch with you?
Good question. So the two easiest places are Instagram and LinkedIn at the moment. So Instagram, I'm Hannah_Ashenden, which is annoying just because Hannah Ashenden was taken. And on LinkedIn, I'm Hannah Ashenden. So you can find me very easily through those two platforms, and you can just send me a message straight away and I'll get back to you.
Okay, so I will put the links to your profiles to the podcast episode description, so you can find it there, and you can get in touch with Hannah. So Hannah, once again, thank you so much for being a guest on Change Talks podcast. I think it was a great discussion, and I hope that we opened the eyes to some people, and they will prevent the burnout in the first place.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really lovely.
Cool. So this is the end of today's episode. If you like Change Talks podcast, don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and hit the follow button, because that's the way how we can get fresh content on a regular basis. So have a great day. Until next time, and make the change work.